So let's take a minute and talk about what we want to do when you have to make a repair in the field. We have the same areas that want to crack out over the windows sometimes, areas of stress that you've got to make your repairs, or just simple, something ran into something, it happens, right? What would the process be? Can you get the foam roller? Ideally, you would use this sprayer to make your repair, fog coat it. The reason I like the sprayer is about 20 seconds after you spray it, you can texture it, okay? If we use a roller, we don't want to put a lot of paint under that texture. We want as little as we can. So that I love to use a foam roller like this, and this doesn't hold much paint, it's smooth, and you can put a minute amount of paint on that'll dry quickly and work perfect for your fog coat. Okay, so if you don't have a sprayer, this will work fine. I caution you against using aerosol splatter in a can if you don't have a long enough time to let it dry. There are propellants in that will actually discolor the paint film if you hurry that. The opposite end, and they're very expensive. On the other end of that, there's a company called Homax, H-O-M-A-X. Some of you may know them. They make drywall tools and texture things. They have a little handheld pump one that you can just load topping or joint compound into. That'll cost you pennies as opposed to $5, $6, $7. It has a little nozzle on it that you can adjust, and you can match that texture closely. Does a wonderful job and doesn't contaminate with the propellants. And then finally, something that we discussed here, and that is when we actually spray and back roll. And here's the big problem that I see at a lot of plants. They'll spray on the material. We need to get it on, to get 8 to 10, we need to spray it on at about 10, 11, or 12 mils here in the factory. Then we come back with a wetted roller in the appropriate nap, depending on the texture. It could be 1/2 inch, 3/8, or 3/4, depending on how heavy the texture is. And what we don't want to do is this routine. And here, I'll take that little thing. If this is a regular roller and I'm doing the wall, and I see this all the time, we spray it on. Number one, if you do that, you need to back roll immediately. Because if you don't, you're going to pull all the mils off once the paint starts to tack, and it'll change the profile. Number two, you want to use the same roller that the plant is using because it leaves a profile on that wall that you want to match. So if you go too heavy, it won't look right. If you go too light, it won't look right. But here's the kiss of death, and I see this all the time at plants around the country. We sprayed this wall, now the guy with the back roller comes up and he's going like this. Oh, he's just rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling up and down and moving across, rolling up and down. You don't want to do that at all. Anytime you're going to spray something and back roll it, and it's what we're doing in the plant now, is you spray, you have a good wet roller, one time you come down and you leave it alone and you move over 50% and you come down one time. Now some people will say, well, the texture has all these nooks and crannies, don't we have to work it in? If you got to work it into the texture's not right. It should be smooth enough where you don't have to go up and down. And so all you're doing is putting on the appropriate millage, coming down one time, and then moving over and overlapping that first one by 50% one time, and then move over. For you in the field doing touch-up, it's not going to be as critical, but know this, in the plant, everything is being finished on the downstroke now, not on the upstroke. And when you have a roller that is leaving its little profile and it's on the downstroke, and then you do a repair in the middle of a wall and go ahead and leave it on the upstroke, that gives you the kind of thing where you look across the wall and you say, you know, the color's right, but there's something just not right about this. It doesn't look uniform. It looks a little shadowy. And that's a good indication on a minor level that that could be the roller itself, the profile going in varying directions and making it look shadowed. So what Steve does and what he does so well is on his weekly inspections here, he's walking out in the plant, he's observing production, he's making sure, along with the production managers, that we're applying the fog coat properly, that we're putting the correct amount of millage on the top, and that we're back rolling in the efficient right behind the sprayer manner on the downstroke only. And then one last thing, just know this, rough is always going to look grayer and more shadowed. Smooth is always going to look lighter and shinier. So this plant is endeavoring to produce the most uniform texture they can within reason, because like I say, it is not the easiest task, just like when you've got to do a marriage line and you've got to match existing texture, it's not the easiest thing. And we want to always do a little test piece in the plant and in the field to make sure we are matching that texture before we go to work and start doing it on a wall or a ceiling. So what we've advised here is that we tune that texture machine every day before we step into the unit, match the profile that we're looking for, and then proceed. No big deal. You need to do the same thing out in the field. And then finally, another big issue for touch-up is cold weather. If they're painting in warm weather and you touch up cold, it's not going to match, especially if the temperature of your paint or walls gets under 50 degrees. It will not match. It will touch up differently at 48 degrees than it does at 65 degrees. 50 is the magic number. There's a little skate in there, because if we tell people 50, they'll be putting it on at 45, you know, and you might be okay in that range, but you want to be 50. And the important thing is to warm store your paint, especially when it's cold out and you're working out in the field. If that paint's in the unit overnight and it's in the 30s, it's not going to touch up correctly, and it's one of the major problems of touch-up. And especially, we know because we get more touch-up complaints in the winter than we do in the summer. There is definitely a correlation there. Radio Shack or an electronics store, you probably have seen these, make an awesome little keychain infrared temperature gauge that you can point at a wall or down in your paint, and it'll tell you exactly what the temperature is. You can buy one of those for like 25 bucks, and I highly recommend them. It's a great thing to do and know what the temperature of your product is. Okay, so in closing, as far as the process that we want to use, always prime before you retexture or repair. Try to match the existing texture as closely as possible. Match up the roller with the roller profile that we're using in the plant. Do you know off the top of your head?
3/4.
3/4? So 3/4.
I saw Don had that.
You want to make sure that you don't do what I call symmetrical touch-up. You never want to touch up like this. You never want to touch up with a brush and just glob it on. You want to always feather out the edges and put as little on the overlapping area as possible. Now, if we're doing our job and producing nice smooth texture, it won't be an issue, because once something's smooth, you can go over it 100 times and you're not going to see it. But if it gets a little bit gritty and then you overlap that, you get what we call a halo. I know you've all seen that. And that's where you almost have a circle around the repair. The middle of it looks fine, but the edge doesn't. That's because we filled in the existing texture around the edges, and from an angle, it looks lighter and shinier. And then finally, don't over sand. I love to do repairs with a sponge, just like that sponge right there. Wet sanding is where it's at. And if you do fur up drywall, all you have to do is take a wet sponge and come down that drywall one time, just like I do with the roller, overlapping 50% in a downward motion, and you'll paste those fibers back down, and your repairs will be hidden a lot more. So as little sandpaper as humanly possible on that type of board.